So, welcome back to Silmarillion Total War and to another battle replay. Been a little while since I've done a Silmarillion replay, or at least it should be about 1.5 months since the last one at this point. Mostly this is because there has been work going on to actually get the latest patch of Silmarillion out, and indeed that is what the game is now running on. I have to say, stuff like the main menus and some of the changes that they've made there look very, very polished indeed, so it's nice to see that some more progress is being made. And of course this is going to be running on the latest patch, and there are a few replays I can now choose from Silmarillion from one of the channels on the Discord, which I've been told it's okay for me to source some replays from. So perhaps in the future we will be seeing a little bit more of Silmarillion on a more regular basis rather than the sporadic scattergun approach that it's been up till now, more because of the kind of development process that's been going on. And I only really wanted to show stuff that people had sent me to make sure that I was giving a proper representation of things. But now that I've been told it's okay to get some replays from the channel, that will be that can only be a good thing. And I hope that J-Monster doesn't mind that I've taken this one, because it's actually one from his perspective. There are a few 3v3s and 4v4s that took my eye in particular, and this is going to be the first one that we do. So you'll be seeing maybe a Silmarillion replay every couple of weeks at this point now. At least that's the great hope that I have, so that I can introduce a little bit more variety even in these very busy times for myself. So as you can see, we are definitely playing on the home turf of Morgoth. However, there isn't going to be any orcs on the field today. There is no Angband, there is no Tollingalhoth. There is, however, a couple of armies of Easterlings, and apparently King Thingol has decided to betray his fellow elves, because he is going to be over here and he is going to be playing with the Easterlings as the more lightly armoured elves of Ossiriand, and for the most part as well, the Flathrim don't go fully in for that sort of thing either, are going to be here as well. Now, I have got Shader version 2 on now. Unfortunately, this is still, I believe, the terrain type, because it's technically counted as desert, where the units still get plastered in this really ugly sand. It's not the end of the world in a relatively fast and furious pitch battle such as this, but it is my great hope that at some point in the near future they decide to remove that effect, because it does look really, really poor. It really ruins quite a lot of the good work that people have done on the models. Like, look at that. That's not very nice. And it's a real shame, because the unit models in Silmarillion do look fantastic, but these effects that get put onto the units in Medieval 2 as a whole tend to be kind of bad. So I hope that there is a bit of a rethink with regards to that. Regardless, let's get back down to the actual business of the battle at hand, starting off with J-Monster's army, who is playing as one of the two Green Elf armies, the Elves of Ossiriand. Definitely not a faction where you want to fight someone straight up, generally speaking. They're definitely very good at hit and run. They've got very good hidden units. They've got a few units which are very good at dealing damage very quickly to the enemy as well. And also, of course, their archers are the main focus of the faction. The Sentries of Gallion being the mounted version of that, which could be a bit of an issue for the Easterlings, but the Easterlings do have horse archers of their own, and they are slightly bulkier than the elven ones here, so it'll be an interesting puzzle for the Elves of Ossiriand to try and figure themselves through. We also have the Outriders of Dwylwen over here, which are lancers, very good at dealing damage off the charge, but again, like most things Ossiriand, they're pretty lightweight, and they're not going to be able to take a great deal of punishment, whether they get stuck in melee with something, or whether they're just getting shot from range. You do want to be a little bit careful with them. You want to keep them moving, which is not too difficult, because of course they are very swift cavalry, as you would expect. We've got another unit of cavalry back here as well, so that's another unit of the Sentries of Gallion. So he's got 3 units of these horse archers. That's very micro-intensive, but it can also be a real pain in the neck if you're facing off against someone who really knows what they're doing with horse archers. It can be a really awkward process to try and get rid of them, and it often makes the battle quite elongated if the horse archer player wants it to be so. Scouts of Gallion are the footbound variant, a very common unit for Ossiriand to bring. They can hide anywhere, which is very useful. It means you don't get forced into skirmish fights as the Elves of Ossiriand, which is very good, because your armour is light to the point where you don't want that to be happening to you. And also, they pack a little bit of a punch in melee as well. They do have a dual-wielding dagger setup, which does give them a little bit of AP, but still it's not really where they want to be. It does give you a bit of utility in the late game, potentially, where you need a little bit of extra oomph to get yourself across the line, but they're not the sort of thing you want to rely on in melee, clearly, but that's the case with most light archers. It's also got another unit of the Outriders of Dwylwen over here. They want to be a little careful about what the Easterlings have brought to the table, but they could potentially be really, really damaging. On the front line we have a combination of Hunters of Rathloriel with the Spear Host of Gallion. reflecting charge bonus. That's a nice little addition there. Gives you an idea of when the units are actually braced and when the anti-cavalry things are going to be kicking in from the front, because it's not always immediately apparent in Medieval 2, even if that mechanic does exist, so that's a nice little thing. The Hunters of Rathloriel are soft target javelins as well, which means they have got plenty of ammunition, but they're not the most damaging. And they don't have the armor-piercing punch of something a little bit higher tier. I'm sure that we'll come into an example of that later on, but they're really designed to do minor amounts of damage over a long period of time, and of course it gives the Elves of Ossiriand another ranged attack. It means you really can't afford to be hovering around the periphery of the Ossiriand army for too long. You really want to try and get them bogged down into a melee fight as quickly as possible, not only because of their archers, but also because they've got plentiful options when it comes to their javelins as well. We've got some Earthen End Tower, which are a really good multi-purpose unit. They're a very good unit of archers first and foremost, but also they're a reasonably well armoured unit of heavy axemen as well, which means they've got that, they're a little bit bulkier than the units that are in front of them here, and also they're capable of kicking out quite a lot of armor-piercing damage. So Ossiriand do have options when it comes time to actually getting into the melee fight itself. Something like the Earthen End Tower can be absolutely critical for their success, depending upon who they're fighting. Ossiriand, the Easterlings I should say, have got that heavily armoured core of Lothlin units, which something like the Earthen End Tower will be really good at dealing with in melee. And then finally we have a General's Bodyguard unit, one of the bulkier units of Ossiriand, one of the bulkier infantry units that Ossiriand can bring, most certainly, are the Kinsmen of Denethor. They are intended to be a bodyguard unit. They don't have multiple HP, but they are relatively strong in number. There are over 100 of them. They're also spears. They're good defensively. They're one of the examples of an Ossiriand unit which can actually do really quite well in a grindy, sort of ground war, attrition-y fight. But there are only one of them, so Ossiriand are not really tooled for that. They do have individual units which can do such things, but be careful if that's what you're going to be doing with them, because it's not really what their first choice would be. Then, the centre of this force is going to be Captain Gervais, who is playing as the Flathrim. They do have access to some heavily armoured Noldor units, unlike the Green Elves they're fighting alongside today. The Marksmen of Balar here looking very resplendent with their feathered helms and their blue tabards. Very good unit of heavy archers. The Easterlings in particular, they only have one unit of foot archers, remember, and that's a relatively new one. It's a legendary company, so you can only bring one, so certainly the Flathrim will have the skirmish advantage over the Easterlings. The same could be said of Ossiriand, of course, albeit in a different way. The Flathrim here are going to be achieving such things through their heavy armour and their attrition qualities. So yeah, they've also placed their stakes on the front line. Very nice. Just in behind them, we have a combination of Warriors of Eglarest and Nobles of Balar. Again, a very nice front line of medium line infantry, which are going to be very capable of going blow for blow with the heavier Easterling units. And of course, that two-handed spear, which is going to be really, really useful for helping to anchor everything from a Flathrim perspective if it comes down to a big old ground war. Marines of Brythombar, which are of course another one of these lighter javelin units. Now, with the Flathrim it's a little bit less clear. I believe the Marines of Brythombar are the soft target javelins and the spear host are the hard target ones, but it's kind of hard to keep track of that because they look very much the same, only the spear hosts have got a spear on their back, and they're very similar in terms of what they offer in melee, other than of course the choice of weaponry. But even so, they're lighter javelins. You want to be a little bit careful with them because if they do get caught in melee they can defend themselves, but they're going to struggle against some of the better Easterling units because they are not really designed for melee exclusively. We've got some Seafarers of Brythombar, which are a mace unit. They're an interesting mace unit because their armour piercing does help them. However, if you put them up against something like a heavily armoured swordsman, their lighter armour means that those heavily armoured swordsmen are also going to be quite effective against them. They're really best in a combined arms setting. As an isolated unit, they're kind of meh, but if you combine them with the other Flathrim units, they can actually be a very effective part of their front line. That's what I've noticed anyway. Back here we've got the Marines of Eglarest, another javelin unit, this one of course with a spear as well. More of a medium tier unit. We've got the Aran Kirlim at the back, which are the heavy line infantry units that the Flathrim can bring to the table. A very effective unit indeed, definitely the equal of the sort of thing that the Sons of Feanor can bring, albeit the Aran Kirlim are very limited in number in the amounts that you can have from a Flathrim perspective. The Mariners of Arendil, the legendary company for the Flathrim, medium infantry once again, but they're effectively just a bulked up version of the Warriors of Eglarest with a few bonuses here and there to stuff like elephant class units and a nice morale buff as well for their nearby troops. a catapult. We've already seen some artillery poking over the horizon on the red team over there, so we shall see who wins that particular duel, and it's a very similar story over here. Then we have another Ossiriand force. Got some Spear Host of Galleon, which are hiding, this one under the command of Stewie. So again, Ossiriand going to be making use of their hidden units. We have some Ondo Hyando and Sarn Athrad, so we're saying that Doriath are the foe that Ossiriand will have to fight over here. Armor-piercing missiles are really, really useful for Ossiriand because their armor-piercing options at range are, other than this unit, very limited. Their javelins tend to be soft-target javelins, and they do have armor piercing in melee, but of course Ossiriand, you want to avoid melee at least for a time in most battles, so that you can do some damage from afar first and do some hit and run style things. So the Ondo Hyando will be very, very useful for dealing with some of the heavier Doriath units, albeit not as absolutely necessary as they would be against, for example, Feanor or Angband, some of those really heavily armoured factions. More Scouts of Galleon over here. We've got some Spear Host of Rathloriel, which are the dedicated spears. In comparison to the Hunters, of course, they're going to be better in melee, but you do sacrifice the ranged attack that they bring to the table. There are the Hunters, for example. We've also got some Skirmishers of Rathloriel, which in comparison to the Sentries of Galleon, they're obviously a little bit bulkier, but they cannot hide anywhere, so it's a trade-off that you make. And then just in behind we also have another single HP bodyguard unit, as they are the Mythern and Tol Galen Macemen, armor-piercing line infantry, very effective at what they do, more numerous than a few other bodyguards as well because they don't have that second hit point to fall back upon, but a very, very useful unit. And we also have the Ents over here looking towering and intimidating as they always do. Doriath should be pretty good at dealing with the Ents though, with all of their axemen and armor-piercing options. Scouts, skirmishers, and it's a very similar story over here, plenty of Rathloriel units. Pretty big army this, because there is still more Ossiriand units over here, including the Randirim, the only unit of body-piercing archers in the game as it stands. So a very useful tool, albeit on field battles that doesn't tend to be as useful as it is in a siege, but it's still a danger perhaps. And then we also have some Sentries of Galleon and Lancers of Adorant, which are a bulkier version really of the I say that they're unshielded, but as with the Outriders of Dweilwyn, their main threat is going to be they're very fast moving, and you need to hit and run with them, because if they hover for too long, you're going to end up taking damage from multiple sources, be it at melee, or at range, or in melee. Then we have the Betrayer in this situation. We have Lord of Belagos playing as Doriath. Rangers of the Girdle here, lighter archers, a half-strength version, of course, a detachment, just to help fill things out. Wardens of the Girdle are here as well. Poison projectiles are one of the mainstays of the Girdle units, but that isn't going to really be all that effective unless they last to the late game, and potentially morale becomes more of an issue. A couple of axes on their back as well. They need to be a little bit careful though, obviously, because Doriath, while they do have some good archer options, Ossiriand are going to be able to they're going to have more arrows coming down range at them, and the Girdle units are fairly lightly armoured themselves, so it's going to be interesting to see how Doriath decide to approach that. Spear Host of the Girdle, which I believe they're the Poison Javelin unit, so not only are they the javelins that you can use as you will, but also they do have that poison effect, so it's a nice little thing that Doriath have going for them. Some Axemen of the Girdle, which are throwing axes, so yet more projectiles, so plenty of projectiles here, going for some of the some of the lighter units from Doriath, and potentially going to try and play that skirmish game with Ossiriand, which is a bold move. The Cuthalim, which are another unit of armor-piercing archers, albeit this is more of your bodyguard. They're very heavily armoured. They're different from the Ondo Hyando across the way. They're designed to be that real powerhouse in melee as well. Very limited in number though, multiple HP though they may be. Tir Lies Danon, which are an armor-piercing axe thrower unit. They look actually quite similar to a lot of the Ossiriand elves across the way. Very dangerous unit this, and could be very, very useful dealing with some of the bulkier targets, especially from someone like the Flathrim. Axe Guard of Region, very nice unit of damaging line infantry. They'll be really effective if they do get into melee with the Ossiriand elves because of the extra damage of those axes, so I think that's a good choice. The Donath and Mablung, which are a bodyguard unit, which of course focus on armor piercing. Not so useful against Ossiriand overall, but they're still a very strong infantry unit, which may be why they were brought. And the Mounted Company of Region, which are a unit of sword cavalry. They will be hoping that they can get in and amongst all of the lancers that Ossiriand have brought. Now we move on to The Easterlings, starting off with Alexander 10Q, who's got some Salamandrine Guard. They're going to be a bit of a threat, especially to the Ossiriand Horse Archers, while the Ossiriand Horse Archers may very well outnumber the Salamanders across the field. The Salamanders are a little bit bulkier, and also they're better at dealing with cavalry when it comes down to a melee fight as well. So the blue team are going to want to avoid a straight-up cavalry-on-cavalry engagement, I think, for the most part here, because I think that's going to be something that the red team will certainly have the edge in. Clan Guard of Lothlin and Halberdiers of Lothlin, classic front line for the Easterlings, this because it's very effective. The Clan Guard of Lothlin providing the defensive abilities, and the Halberdiers, of course, providing that armour-piercing phalanx, which is less ubiquitous in Silmarillion, so when you can field it in this number, it can be very, very effective. And in the middle, we've also got Warband of Lothlin, which for an entry-level unit have got a big shield, which is, of course, very desirable against factions like Ossiriand. Back over here, we've got the Fangs of the Faithless, the one unit of foot archers that the Eastlings can bring. Worth bringing in this situation, even though skirmishing for long periods of time is not something I think the red team are going to want to engage in. You do still want this unit. I think it's a very important part of the Eastlings, because they were quite awkward to play without any archers on foot. The fact that they have this option now gives them a little bit more flexibility than they did, while not sacrificing their identity that they've had since before. The Hroatani Marauders are a unit of action as well. They've got a little shield now, which gives them something of a protection against arrows, but of course it's still something they're not going to enjoy. But yeah, they can close into distance. Something like the Nobles of Balar would be a really good target for them. The Amberone Honor Guard, Amberona Honor Guard, very, very tanky, a very good unit to put your general in. They may be outperformed by some other bodyguards from the Elven perspective, but they're very, very good at staying alive, multiple HP, big armour, big shields, all that good stuff. The Pillagers of Heimring, or Himring I should say, unit of Axe Thrower Cavalry, very, very useful, and of course some Hroatani Nomads as well, which is actually a Horse Archer unit, which is interesting. It's another Horse Archer, it gives them more... We'll see how they do, because this is obviously a unit which the Ossiriand Elves should be fairly comfortable at zoning out, because you only have to look at them to see they're not going to be very good at dealing with arrow fire. And finally we have Waffles, who has got a catapult up here on this hill. He's also got some Salamandrine Guard just in behind these stakes that they've placed. Fangs of the Faithless in and amongst them as well, so ready to engage in an initial skirmish perhaps with J-Monster. I'm not sure that's a wise idea, but we shall see. Marauders of Himring, the foot axe throwers. We've got some Halberdiers of Lothlin in here as well. Clan Guard of Lothlin, Warband of Lothlin. Not a lot of Falksmen going on here, which is perhaps understandable because they get ripped apart by the Ossiriand archers. And then some Hroatani Nomads here at the back as well. So that was a bit elongated, but it's been a little while since Silmarillion has been on the channel. And also, there's a few new things as well that we can see. So, without further ado, let's begin. So, as I said, cavalry-wise, I think the red team will want to try and force an engagement, but that's going to be easier said than done if the blue team are patient with their cavalry. If they keep their cavalry in and around their archers and their units that are on foot, I think that they can get away with skirmishing with the enemy without too many issues. And of course, from the red team's perspective, most of these Ossiriand elves are going to be hidden, so it's going to be an interesting situation. This Waffles has of course got his catapult, and already we can see fire arrows and the catapult from the Flathrim thudding into the front line of Alexander 10Q here, which is densely packed. They're going to be able to withstand quite a lot of punishment here. But I think he actually has a pretty big decision to make right from the off here, because if he just stays here and takes it, then they're going to be able to do quite a lot of damage over time. And it's interesting here actually that the catapult is going to be firing into, and a direct hit there on the Mariners of Arendil, but Waffles, instead of going after J-Monster's army, which is of course still mostly hidden, much better instead to go after the Flathrim, who are, it's much more obvious where all of their units are going to be. So trading blows here with the catapults back and forth. Another one falls by the wayside there, so some really good hits from the catapult there. And fortunately here for the red team as well, Waffles' catapult has not taken a single loss yet, which is bad news for the Flathrim. Over here, meanwhile, Salamanders are moving forward, so the Flathrim perfectly content to just sort of sit here and try and continue on their present course. But if they lose that catapult, they are going to be in a little bit of bother, I think, because then their infantry could start getting bombarded. The Salamanders are moving forward right in front of the Flathrim army, which is risky, this. Oof, and you can see over here as well, the Salamanders moving in, and this is a problem, these fiery projectiles do have a tendency to destroy artillery in Silmarillion, which is, I think this is a good thing, because it gives fire arrows much more of a use on the battlefield rather than just being something that looks cool. There you can see, however, the salamanders do pay a bit of a price for that. The Marines of Brythombar doing some good damage there, and yeah, I think that must be armor-piercing javelins if they were able to kill that many in a single volley. I'm not sure. Should really have looked that up beforehand, but with most others I've remembered, but with the Flathrim javelins it's a little bit less clear because of how similar they all look. But yeah, interesting opening this. You can see also Doriath deciding to close up and link up with their newfound Easterling allies. And this will essentially force the hand of Stewie. He is going to need to move forward to make something happen here. Skirmishes of Rathloriel, trading blows a little bit with the Wardens of the Girdle, and that's definitely going to go in favour of the Ossiriand elves. Over here, Sentries of Galleon trying to skirmish, trying to pull the Easterlings around a little bit, but if you're the Easterlings in this situation, you just need to not let them do that. Like the Froatani Nomads, you can throw at the other cavalry, and yes, they will lose, but you're not going to lose out in terms of the cost efficiency there. So plenty of these shirtless Easterling hooligans going to push forward and try and force those Elven cavalrymen onto the back foot. But the Eastlings are going to very likely be quite cautious because of how Ossiriand like to do their business. Moving forward here, one green tree here in the middle of all of this. Life finds a way. Actually, there's more trees over there. Never mind. Spear host of Brythombar moving forward. There they are. Here you can see as well the Doriath archers starting to open up with their poison arrows. These Brythombar units, the more lightly armoured elements of the Flathrim army, they may be shielded, but they're not going to enjoy being in full view of all of these archers necessarily. Not entirely sure why they feel the need to do this, to be honest with you. They've got their javelins out in front, but they could just push forward a little bit more with their marksmen of Balar, and the skirmish fight would go in their favour. Waffles pushing his catapult over here, and yeah, the Flathrim would be the better target to go after. Now that their artillery has been completely dismantled, trying to hit something like all of these nobles of Balar and start chipping away at their manpower would, I think, be quite a useful thing. Froatani Nomads and the Sentries of Galleon still just playing cat and mouse with one another. Sentries of Galleon the superior unit, but every volley that comes in is still going to result in quite a few kills for the Easterlings here. And over way on the other side here, Mounted Company of Rhaegian moving in. Scouts of Galleon do take a charge, but I'm not sure whether this was a particularly good move, because the Spear host of Galleon are right here. They may very well have been hidden before we came over here, and also in now come the Lancers of Adorant. Yeah, this is bad news for the Mounted Company of Rhaegian. There was no real need to go after infantry, I don't think, with this sword cavalry. If there is an opportunity, you of course have to try and take it, but it was always going to be risky to do this, and yeah, how are the Lancers of Adorant doing? Yeah, they're fine. I mean, there's plenty of damage coming in from those Froatani Nomads. All of these are Galleon units, so the Easterlings will be filling their boots in terms of kills here. Over time, those Spear host of Galleon not going to enjoy being in melee with them. Scouts of Galleon also returning fire though, but that was costly. I don't think that was great for the red team, because a lot of these Mounted Company of Rhaegian, which would have been really useful for dealing with those lancers later on, are now very, very depleted. Froatani Nomads still going to fire. They're going to have to rely on stuff like the Salamanders later on to try and do their thing. Meanwhile, forward come the Fangs of the Faithless, all on their lonesome, which is quite interesting, but there's no cavalry over here to really take advantage of this. I'm not sure whether Alexander's making a particularly great move here, because there's so many archers which are just going to be able to rip through the Fangs of the Faithless, and also they're going to be getting close enough to the point where the soft target javelins are also going to be able to chip in here. So yeah, they need to get out of here. Again, you've already forced the Flathrim into taking some substantial losses, so there's no need for you to start rushing things here as to the Easterlings. In many ways, Waffles should just continue to bombard them with his catapult and see what happens. Because if those fire arrows turn onto the catapult, then those marksmen of Balar could even the score pretty quickly. Froatani Nomads pulling back. The Eastlings starting to wrap around with a portion of the Eastlings. The Green Elves starting to wrap around with a portion of their army. Some of their army, however, is also over here ready to reinforce the Flathrim should the Easterlings and Doriath decide to lurch forward and try and punch right through the middle. Still fire arrows being utilised. Axemen of the Girdle and Fangs of the Faithless are falling. Not in great numbers, but all of this is starting to add up. Waffles is also pulling back. It's not surprising at all to me that the red team have been reluctant to move into the blue team's territory because of what Ossiriand are all about. You know that they're going to have hidden units, and we've already seen the Regian cavalry suffer at the hands of that with those spear hosts that were hidden. More of that would have been happening if they decided to charge forward. But they could have also overwhelmed the Ossiriand infantry as well, so swings and roundabouts. They've decided to be a little bit more defensive. This does allow the blue team to potentially soft surround the enemy, however, and start maybe getting a bit of a crossfire off with their skirmish. If you decide to bottle yourselves up in this situation, as the red team, you're really opening the door for Ossiriand to use all their archers on you, and that could be quite painful. More arrows coming forth. And they're going after stuff like the Axe Guard of Regian. That's interesting. Slightly more heavily armoured. As the Doriath unit goes, I'd be much more tempted by going after the Girdle units. Yes, they're less of a threat in melee, but you're more likely to get some significant kills there. What have we over here? Sentries of Galleon moving back, so still there's this little cavalry skirmish that's going on. The Ferrotani nomads at this stage starting to look a little bit haggard. Some of the Sentries of Galleon have also taken some losses, but you can see here the difference in quality, and the entry-level Easterling horse archers are starting to take losses, but they have at least covered the movement of Waffles' main army, and the Salamanders are still alive, so if need be they can up the ante. They're going to need to move here, the blue team. Well, someone's going to need to make the first move. Waffles, I mean, to be fair, I think the red team could force the blue team into moving by using this catapult. If they started to just bombard the Flathrim position, as they were earlier on, I think they'd be in really big trouble. And they would need to either retreat or move forward, and if they were to retreat, it would leave some potential gaps for then the red team to exploit by moving forward. So I think the momentum is up for grabs for the red team, ironically, here, in spite of the fact that they've been the ones that have been kind of retreating throughout this battle. They could claim the initiative. But Ossiriand are going to move forward here. They're not necessarily the best at trying to force their hand against defensive positions like this. Scouts of Galleon taking some hits from the Fangs of the Faithless that are on the hillside over there, but they will return fire. And just through sheer amount of arrows, you would imagine this should be just fine. And there are also the actually poison arrows to the Fangs of the Faithless as well, so plenty of poison going on here. Now, potentially, we're going to see a big commitment here by the red team. Going to try and go right through the middle, perhaps identifying the Flathrim. At least with the Flathrim, you know what you're going to be facing off against. You know where they are. So you know exactly what's going to be required to deal with the situation. Waffles is also moving some of his units over to protect the flank from J-Monster's potential advance. The same could also be said for Doriath, still marshalling against that Ossiriand flank. I do think Alexander needs to send forward a little bit more than this if he's going to try and overwhelm the Flathrim completely. The Flathrim just getting back into a defensive shape, ready. The Eglarest infantry and the nobles of Balar getting ready to hold the line. And then there's also all of these javelins that they can use as well. The Aran Kia Lim being sent towards the front line. A very, very tough unit of line infantry, as previously said. What have we here? The first infantry engagement between here. We've got the Axe Guard of Regian charging in, a single unit of them. There's only 74 of them. I'm not sure what Belagos was thinking here. One unit is not going to be enough to deal with it. Like, the Axe Guard of Regian individually are going to be really, really good against Rathloriel units, but the numbers were so out of balance for Doriath there. That seems like a really bizarre choice. Just throwing one of your units under the bus there. Warband of Lothlin are now moving in, so I think it's about time we went down to half speed, to be honest, because this is where things are going to get a little bit chaotic, I feel. Warband of Lothlin moving in first. Sons of Ulfang, which we didn't actually see in the composition phase, going to be capable of doing a lot of damage, armor piercing as well, but seeing the danger that they represent, they're going to be using their javelins on them as they charge in. Warband of Lothland are going to struggle against the Arankia and the Nobles of Balar. And again, I'm not sure there's enough being committed forward here. If you're going to be aggressive like this, you need to commit in a big way. Javelins coming in from the side as well. Marines of Brythombar doing some damage to the Easterlings and to the Girdle units from Doriath as they try and get themselves into position. Axemen of the Girdle are going to try and use their throwing axes, which should be quite effective on that Flathrim front line. Over here, meanwhile, Scouts of Gellion pushing back, so Waffle's actually going on the attack, which is interesting. Seeing perhaps that Ossiriand have had to move forward, they've revealed their hand somewhat. A lot of their units that were hidden, it's now very obvious where they are. But Ossiriand are going to be able to do quite a lot of damage on the approach here to the Easterlings, through their javelins and through their archers. So if Waffles is going to be aggressive here, he needs to commit to it fully and just throw everything in and try and force Ossiriand into the kind of melee engagements they don't really want to be taking. Wards of the Girdle now moving in, having much better luck now that there's more numbers on the front line. Wards of the Girdle pulling out both of their axes. The Rathloriel units not going to enjoy facing off against all of these axemen, but they should be able to hold the line with the help of the spear host. There's still these units over here from Stewie as well. He's just ready to try and hit in from the side. Doriath still have enough left in reserve that they can respond to that, but it's interesting this, because if they commit everything forward here, the red team, they may very well be able to overwhelm the Flathrim front line. But if they do that, they could get flanked. Actually, you know what? The sand effect isn't too bad. It was worse on the Doors of Angband map that I did a while back. Marksmen of Balar taking damage. Yeah, they need more on the front line here, the red team. It says victory seems certain for the Clan Guard of Lothland, but that isn't going to be the case if the Nobles of Balar shift forward even slightly. And also they're taking a lot of damage here from the side, from all of the javelins, trying to push forward with a flank as well. Marines of Brythombar going after the Froatani Marauders. Seafarers of Brythombar also going to move forward to stop any of that nonsense. Pillagers of Himring will be there to punish this as well, though, throwing axes. Two can play at that game. I think the Flathrim have managed to use their javelins on this front line quite effectively, but if they do push forward and if they, overextend themselves, then the Easterlings can definitely respond in kind. Still, though, these Marines of Brythombar are doing horrid damage to this front line, and this is where they needed a little bit more in terms of numbers to try and find those gaps. They needed their own ranged support forward a little bit more quickly here as well, I think, the red team. Pillagers of Himring continuing to fight. Catapult over here. Waffles needs to use this catapult a little bit more quickly than he's currently doing, I think. Marauders of Himring moving in. Looks like we're going to see the first out-and-out melee engagement for J-Monster's infantry, as the Easterlings do move in. Halberdiers of Lothland. That'll be a bit of a pain for the Ossiriand elves to try and deal with. Scouts of Gellion shooting in from the side, and it seems like a bit of a similar situation here to how it was in the middle. The Eastlings are trying to be aggressive, but they're being attacked from the side by skirmishers, and that's going to be bad for them. Sentries of Gellion hitting them from the side as well. I'm not sure where the Salamanders went, but surely they would be useful in this situation. They're going to try and get into melee. Yeah, it's a bit of a messy advance, this, and that's not really what the red team needed. If that sort of thing continues, then I think the blue team are going to be able to sew this up. More Marines of Brythombar moving forward. Pillagers of Himring in melee, which is quite interesting. If they're going to try and cycle in and out, then fair enough. What have we got over here? The Honour Guard. The big guns are moving forward. They'll be able to clean up the Seafarers pretty quickly, and a unit of their quality is going to be absolutely needed on the front line, as the Marines of Brythombar are now attacking the rear of the Easterling lines. It's not looking great for them at the moment. This Flathrim front line has been completely unyielding against the level of assault that has come their way so far. Things looking a little bit better over here, but then that's because there's more units being committed to the front line, and also there is a gap where the Nobles of Balar aren't, but they're just going to plug the gap with more units as well. The Ents are also now moving in and causing a lot of disarray here amongst the Girdle units that were trying to make an impact on the Ossiriand part of the middle defence. The Tyrann Lysdanen, those armour-piercing throwing axes, will be very, very useful against the Ents. Meanwhile, still no flanking assault here from the Spear Host of Rathloriel, and to be honest, there is a good opportunity to do so now. I think Doriath sees the fact that if they don't commit everything forward and try and make something happen here, their chances in this fight are pretty much nil. So they're going to need to try and go in here from the front, and that will give Stewie the opportunity he's been waiting for to commit those units from the side. Plenty more Girdle units, more Axe Guard of Region. Still the Ents living for the time being, but that's a lot of damage they're taking. They will fall away pretty quickly unless the Ents can chase down the Tir-En Lysdanen. Halberdiers of Lothland trying to do their thing on the front line, and to be fair, without the Halberdiers, the Easterling assault probably would have gone even worse than it has already done. They are not going to be enough to turn things around here. Marines of Brythombar. Yeah, the Eastlings starting to become shaken in several areas. Froatani Marauders using their throwing axes. Backing up the Amberona Honour Guard. The Catapult crew alongside some of the Seafarers. Still quite a few Flathrim units over here, but between the Bodyguard unit and the Axeroad, they should be able to at least stop that flanking force. Meanwhile, how's J-Monster's infantry getting on? Earthen End Tower being committed to melee. Facing off against the Clan Guard of Lothland. That should be a pretty good battle for the Earthen End Tower, but if they still had ammunition, I'm sure J-Monster would have preferred to use that. Outriders of Dweilwen are still here. Really though, how's the front line fight going? A real mixed bag for both sides apparently. I mean, it's a very even fight this, but the Eastlings probably need to be winning this a little bit more readily, and from the sides as well, with the presence of these heavy axemen, that could be enough to swing the fight in favour of the Green Elves. What's certainly not going to be helping is the fact that there's still all of these arrows coming in from the side, which the Eastlings have been consistently having to deal with throughout this entire fight. The Fangs of the Faithless are back there trying to lay down some support, but their angle probably isn't the best. And they're scoring some decent hits, I suppose, but nowhere near as good as what the Ossiriand elves are managing to inflict upon the Easterlings. The Catapult crew is here. Surely the Catapult's not out of ammo already. Maybe it is. Maybe that's why they haven't been using it. Meanwhile, Spear Host of Brythombar shaken in the face of those salamanders. Could still be a really useful tool as the battle goes on. And I think more and more here the red team are going to be more reliant on these throwing projectiles that they still have to try and even the odds a little bit, try and do a lot of damage quickly to the blue team's lines. Donath and Mablung are on the front line. They will be really, really good against the Noldor units from the Flathrim, but I'm not sure whether the support they have around them is on the level that they need it to be to reverse their fortunes here. More poison arrows. Spear Host of Rathloriel, victory seems certain. Still fighting hard. Spear Host of the Girdle being committed to the front line, but again, they're lighter spears. They need something a little bit more than this if they're going to try and make something happen. And now we can also see the marching of Stewie's secondary force, backed up by the Skirmishers of Rathloriel and the Hunters of Rathloriel, doing some damage at range. They've also got some Spear Hosts which will be able to engage in melee. They've also got their cavalry over here still as well, stuff like the Lancers of Adoram, who took a bit of damage at the hands of that Doriath sword cavalry, but they could move in and get some really nasty rear charges as well. A lot of this force, to be fair, is made up of ranged units. The Ondo Hyando are here, which is potentially really bad news for some of the really important units that the red team have over here. Tir-En Lysdanen are still up. Villagers of Himring trying to get in and amongst things. They're trying to charge in, but again, like, they're charging into what is a section of line that includes spears, so I'm not sure they're going to get what they want from this. Regardless, Spear Host of Galleon as well, already proving themselves to be a real menace for the red team. Froatani Marauders now getting into melee. You can see this part of the Flathrim line is now falling apart, and perhaps seeing a bit of an opportunity. Axe Guard of Region are also being committed. An opportunity here to try and make something happen here against the Flathrim lines, and the Flathrim actually moving forwards. In so doing, they've caused quite a few gaps to appear in their defence, maybe a rush of blood to the head here, and there is an opportunity here for the red team to now take advantage of that, because the Flathrim line has been very solid so far, but I'm not sure why they decided to move from this front line. They lurched forward and it hasn't been to their benefit at all. Pillagers of Himring now charging into the back of those Spear Host of Brythombar. Interesting indeed. Now over here, Earthen End Tower continuing to do their thing against the Clan Guard of Lothland. Slow and steady wins the race, but over here, Outriders of Dweilwen charging into the centre of those Easterling lines, just in time too, because those Halberdiers just had cleared out the centre of the Ossiriand force, where the slightly better units of the Earthen Tower weren't. The Easterlings were actually outperforming the Elves in this. Those Outriders of Dwelin trying to make something happen, but again, as soon as they get caught in amongst all these halberdiers, it can get pretty grisly for them. Spear host of Galleon still doing their thing. The scouts of Galleon that are out of ammunition now drawing their daggers and doing their thing. One of the salamanders does fall. The Easterlings are the ones now doing their thing with the cavalry. Sentries of Galleon trying to charge in here. They do get a successful charge on the halberdiers, but I can't imagine this is going to go all that well for them when they get sandwiched in between halberdiers and the salamanders. So a bit of a messy fight over here, but Waffles has done pretty well, I think. It was much more of a traditional line battle when things got going over here, and that was to the Easterlings' advantage, even with the support from the Green Elves coming in from the flank of those archers. It wasn't enough to completely overturn the fact that the bulkier Easterlings have just got a better affinity for that kind of warfare. Mythern and Tolgalen coming in from the side, engaging with both the Cuthalim and the Fangs of the Faithless. The Mythern might need a little bit of support, and there it is in the form of some spears. Do they have the muscle to get themselves over the line here, the blue team? There are the Doriath, completely surrounded at this point. I mean, stuff like the Iran Kialim will really not enjoy facing the Doriath, but they just need to be overwhelmed at this point. Croatani Nomads, there's still a lot of cavalry charging around. There goes the Green Elf General for J Monster. Still a lot of fast movers, and you have to say, most of the cavalry that remains is for the red team. Croatani Nomads not the best at charging in, but they'll do what they can. Here are the Pillagers of Himring as well. Could this cavalry be the difference? They need to be careful with the stakes that are mostly concealed by all the bodies that are all over the place here. The Ondo Hyando are now firing in. Could they be going after the Honor Guard, who have again performed really very well? They've taken a lot of punishment, kept themselves alive, but now they're getting shot by armor-piercing projectiles, so we'll see how long that can last for. Earthen Tower victory seems certain. Still some kinsmen of Denethor, but they are outnumbered here, and I think Waffles is going to win over here. The red team may have what it takes. Earthen Tower still alive. Still some scouts of Galleon back there as well. Fangs of the Faithless in the backfield. Lancers of Adoran from Stewie. He definitely needs to get those Lancers on the move and charging into as many targets as he possibly can. Sentries of Galleon, there's still a lot of cavalry from both sides, it seems. That's a lot of restraint that people have shown with their cavalry. More so than is typical, but Stewie's flanking force, which has come in, might provide too much in the way of numbers to realistically be counteracted. He's flooded over the backfield that's Doriath, vacated to try and punch through the middle, which kind of worked, but it was a little bit too late by then. The Amberona Honor Guard defeat seems certain. Only a military genius could win this battle. Yeah. The blue team, I think, opened up just a bit too much of a lead. Spear host of Rathombar, as well as some marksmen of Balar over here. And it's that flanking force, really. I think they needed to just commit a little bit more to their initial assault, the red team. There goes the Easterling General. One of the Easterling Generals, at any rate. Croatani Marauders are broken. Stewie is going to be the one with the most left, you would have to say. I thought for a moment that the Flathrim lurching forward with their front line and making some gaps appear could be a really bad error. Because up until that point, the Flathrim looked very comfortable in their front line. But in the end, fortunately for them, it did not turn out to be the case. Earthen Tower and try and go after the Salamanders. There's a lot of javelins from the Hunters of Rathlorion. And at this point, it really is just clean-up. Another Easterling General falls. It's a shame for Waffles, because it was looking like it was a very close fight between him and J Monster, to be fair. I'm not sure whether he would have won, but it was possible he could have. Scouts of Galleon back in their position on the hill. But unfortunately the battle just went against his team, and now he finds himself firmly in the crosshairs. A few Flathrim units here as well. Nobles of Balar again. Strong unit on the front line, still 58 of them alive despite all of the heavy lifting they've done in this fight. The Ossiriand keeping themselves alive decently, as you would expect with all that armour that they pack on. A floating tent. More of Melkor's foul sorcery is afoot. What is left from the Easterlings exactly? It must be just this stuff back here. There's Lances of Adarant here. And indeed it is, just the Fangs of the Faithless left standing, just like the last battle we saw with them in. And unfortunately with the stakes pointing that way, the Fangs of the Faithless are going to take a charge. What a hugely effective one though, you'd have to say. Balance of forces is evenly matched. That's questionable. The Cuthalim is still over there, so Thingol, the Betrayer, still stands. Going to be engaged by 5 Nobles of Balar. There is Thingol with his antler crown. Doriath still very much alive. Scouts of Gellion filling their boots with more kills, picking on those poor warband of Lothlin as they retreat. Yeah, Fangs of the Faithless, last stand, broken and fighting to the death. And there he goes. Which of course means that Balagost and his Doriath army are technically the last ones of his team left standing, with 8 Cuthalim. Some Marines of Brythombar coming over here to try and help the nobles. Very strong unit in melee individually though, the Cuthalim, so it's going to take a bigger unit to finally bring them to heel. Warriors of Eglarest on the way over. Let's see here. Marksmen of Balar are on the way across. I mean, it's not going to take much, surely. I would imagine actually a cavalry charge would be sufficient to finish them off. Although I say that, only 4 of them remain. They're doing some good things with their long swords, but they did take damage at the hands of those nobles. Thingol engaging in a bit of kinslaying. Oof. Lances of Adarant. I mean, one charge here could be enough to bring down these 4. I don't know if they will at that distance. Yeah, they're just going to bump into them in melee. But an interesting fight that. I feel as though the tone was set early on when the advance from the red team wasn't quite as all-encompassing as it needed to be. And ultimately the blue team didn't throw it away sufficiently for the red team to realistically get back into it. So I think the right team won in the end. And you saw how awkward it can be to fight Ossiriand, because advancing into them is not the clearest of paths to take with all of their hidden units. And there goes Thingol. Lanced in the end. But yeah, it can be a really awkward thing to face Ossiriand when so many of their units can hide. And there we have it. So relatively even kill counts, but that's to be expected. 3v3, very similar army sizes all around. See what did the damage for the Ossiriand armies. Kinsmen of Denethor held things down for as long as they possibly could before falling away. The Sentries of Gellion doing reasonably well. The Scouts of Gellion, the heart really of this Ossiriand effort, was their entry-level archers after all. And 228 kills on those Erfinen towers, so both at range and in melee. They definitely proved their worth on this occasion. As for Stewie's army, over 100 kills on both of his spear host of Rathloriel units, which is very impressive actually for a unit of basic spears, especially given that one of his primary enemies would have been Doriath, who generally speaking should be quite good against that unit. But of course they weren't really prepared to deal with that flank. Randirim doing very well. We actually didn't see the Randirim on the field at all in action, but clearly they're doing their job, because they're meant to be a unit that hides on the periphery and does lots of damage with their body-piercing arrows. So fair play there. The Ents also breaking things up, disrupting things. They ultimately did fall away, but they did exactly what they needed to do. So yeah, I'll say a big thank you to J-Monster, because while he didn't directly send this to me, he did point me in the direction of the channel where all of these replays are held. And a big thank you to all of the players that have been a part of this battle replay. Nice that the new patch is out, means that I can obviously get involved in this a little bit more, like I said, in terms of doing a few more Silmarillion replays on a little bit more of a regular basis. At least that's the plan. But yeah, outside of that, I mean, I would have liked to have covered the new patch for Silmarillion in more of a stream-based format, and J-Monster did actually ask if I could do that. But obviously, as mentioned in the recent channel update, streaming is extremely difficult given my current schedule. It's unfortunate, but it is what it is. But there's no point in doing a live stream by the time this one comes out, really, because again, you very much missed the boat by about a month by that point. So yeah, there's no real point to doing that at this point. But again, I am putting more thought into how I can make things work from that perspective without compromising the regular schedule of my channel in other ways. But it is what it is. If I do have any more thoughts on that, then I will get back to people and let them know, and I'll probably let them know by way of a YouTube community message. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join me for whatever is next.